Picture this. A beautiful countess stands before her mirror, bathing in the blood of a virgin servant. She believes it will keep her young forever. Behind her, 650 bodies lie buried beneath her castle. This isn't a horror movie. This is the true story of Elizabeth Báthory, one of history's most prolific serial killers. And she's just number 6 on our list. History remembers the evil kings, Nero, Caligula, Henry VII. But these 6 queens, they make male tyrants look merciful. From mass torture to political assassinations, from poisoning entire courts to bathing in human blood, these women wielded power with a cruelty that shocked even their brutal times. Before we begin, let's address something important. When we talk about evil rulers, the conversation almost always centers on men. Kings who burned cities, emperors who murdered thousands, dictators who plunged nations into war. But what about the queens? History often overlooks them, or worse, romanticizes their cruelty as strength or ruthlessness. But make no mistake, the 6 women on this list committed atrocities that rival and often exceed the worst male rulers in history. Can you imagine being tortured to death because you accidentally looked at a queen the wrong way? Or being one of 138 serfs beaten to death for a noblewoman's amusement? These aren't legends or exaggerations. These are documented historical facts, recorded by witnesses, investigated by authorities, and in some cases, punished by execution. What makes these queens particularly terrifying isn't just their body counts. It's the creativity of their cruelty, the cold calculation of their crimes, and the way they use their royal power to torture and kill with complete impunity, sometimes for decades. So let's descend into the darkest corners of royal history. These are the 6 queens who prove that evil has no gender. Starting with number 6. Number 6, Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess. In the winter of 1610, authorities stormed Countess Castle in Hungary. What they found inside would become one of history's most horrifying discoveries. Bodies, dozens of dead and dying young women, drained of blood, mutilated, and discarded like garbage. The woman responsible, Countess Elizabeth Báthory, one of the wealthiest and most powerful noblewomen in Europe. Elizabeth was born into Hungarian nobility in 1560. Beautiful, educated, and wealthy beyond measure. She married Ferenc Nadasti, a war hero, and lived in luxury for years. But here's what history often hides. Some historians believe her husband taught her the torture techniques. He was notorious for his brutal treatment of Ottoman prisoners. They may have shared torture as a twisted hobby during their marriage. After his death in 1604, she had no one left to restrain her. The legend says it started with a single moment. Elizabeth slapped a servant girl whose blood splashed onto her hand. When she wiped it away, she believed her skin looked younger where the blood had touched. That was the moment obsession was born. She began luring young peasant girls to her castle with promises of employment as servants. Once inside, they were never seen again. The torture methods were medieval nightmares. Girls were beaten with clubs, burned with hot irons, frozen naked in the snow and doused with water until they became ice sculptures. Some had their fingers cut off one by one. Others were starved, then forced to eat their own flesh. But perhaps her most horrifying device was the Iron Maiden. Elizabeth had a custom torture device built, shaped like a woman and lined with spikes inside. Victims were placed inside while the spikes slowly pushed inward, piercing their bodies at dozens of points. Elizabeth would watch through a small peephole while dining. Can you imagine being a parent in a nearby village? Watching your daughter leave for the castle, excited for her new position, and never hearing from her again? But Elizabeth didn't work alone. 4 servants helped her: Fico, Alona, Darya, and Catalin. They lured the girls and participated in the torture. They held victims down. They cleaned up the blood. They buried the bodies. Elizabeth's killing spree lasted at least 6 years, possibly much longer. The official trial documented 80 victims, but witnesses testified the true number was far higher. Some said 650 bodies were buried beneath the castle. When authorities finally investigated, and only because Elizabeth had started taking daughters of lesser nobles, not just peasants, they found undeniable evidence: fresh corpses,
dying girls. Lists in Elizabeth's own handwriting documenting her victims. She was never formally tried because of her noble status. Instead, she was walled up alive in her castle, with only small slits for food and air. She died 4 years later in 1614, alone in her stone tomb. Her 4 servants? They weren't so lucky. All 4 were tortured before execution. Their fingers were torn off with red-hot pincers. Then they were burned alive. Elizabeth escaped that fate solely because she was nobility. 650 dead. Elizabeth Báthory is just the beginning. Our next queen didn't bathe in blood. She drowned her rivals in wine and murdered over 1,000 members of her own family.
Number 5. Wu Zetian, China's ruthless empress. In 7th century China, women had virtually no political power. Wu Zetian didn't just break that rule. She shattered it with blood, poison, and cunning. She remains the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor in her own right. And she achieved it through one of history's most brutal political purges. Born in 624 AD, Wu Zetian entered the imperial palace as a low-ranking concubine to Emperor Taizong. After his death, she was supposed to become a Buddhist nun, the fate of all deceased emperors' concubines. But Wu had other plans. She seduced the new emperor, Gaozong, married him, and began systematically eliminating rivals. First, she targeted the current empress and the emperor's favorite concubine. What happened next is one of history's darkest accusations. According to court records, Wu gave birth to a daughter. When Empress Wang came to visit the newborn, Wu allegedly strangled her own infant with her bare hands. When the emperor arrived moments later, Wu began screaming that the baby was dead. She blamed the empress. Whether this actually happened or was political propaganda, we may never know. But the accusation worked. The empress was deposed, arrested, and sentenced to death. But Wu didn't just execute her rival. She wanted her to suffer. Empress Wang and the former concubine Shao had their hands and feet cut off while fully conscious. Then they were thrown into a massive wine vat to drown slowly in their own blood mixed with wine. As Empress Wang died, she cursed Wu, "May Wu be reborn as a mouse, and I a cat, so I may tear her throat out in every life." The curse disturbed Wu so deeply that she banned cats from all imperial palaces for the rest of her life. Even an empress who murdered thousands feared that curse. Drop a comment right now. Would you have the courage to curse someone as they were killing you? That kind of defiance in the face of death is something we rarely see in history. But Wu Zetian was just getting started. Over the next decades, she orchestrated a reign of terror that would make Stalin envious. Political opponents mysteriously died, poisoned, executed, or simply disappeared. She established a secret police network called the Cruel Officials that encouraged citizens to report on each other. She invented 10 new torture devices. She used psychological warfare, forcing prisoners to watch their family members being tortured. She executed dozens of Tang dynasty princes and princesses, killed her own niece, and some historians believe she poisoned her own husband when he became an obstacle. Even her own sons weren't safe. Wu had 4 sons. 2 were exiled after opposing her. 1 was possibly poisoned on her orders. Only 1 survived to take the throne after her death. Can you imagine living in a court where saying the wrong word, looking at someone incorrectly, or being related to the wrong person could result in your entire family being executed? That was daily life under Wu Zetian. Historians estimate that during her 15-year reign as emperor, Wu Zetian ordered the deaths of over 1,000 members of the royal family and political elite. Yet here's what makes her story complex. Despite her brutality, she was an effective ruler. She promoted based on merit, not birth, supported Buddhism, expanded the empire, reformed agriculture. Was she a monster or a woman doing what any male emperor would have done to maintain power in a society that didn't want her to rule? History still debates this question, but one thing is certain: her body count rivals any male tyrant. So far, we've covered over 1,600 deaths. But we're just getting started. Our next queen killed purely for entertainment. Number 4. Darya Saltykova, the torture Baroness. In 18th century Russia, nobles had almost unlimited power over their serfs. Darya Saltykova took this power and turned it into a 7-year nightmare of torture and murder. She killed at least 138 people, most of them young women, and she did it for fun. Born in 1730 to a wealthy Moscow family, Darya seemed like a typical noblewoman. She married young, had 2 sons, and lived a life of luxury. But when her husband died in 1756, something snapped. Or perhaps, like Elizabeth Báthory, it had always been there, waiting. Darya began systematically torturing and murdering the serfs on her estate. But unlike other rulers on this list who killed for political power or paranoia, Darya killed because she enjoyed it. And she had a pattern. She specifically targeted newly married serf women. Can you imagine? You're a young woman, just married, starting your life. Within days, the Baroness summons you to the manor house. You never come home. Sometimes she forced the new husbands to watch. Her methods were horrifically creative. She would beat young women with logs until their bodies were pulp, burn them with hot irons, tie them naked outside in winter until they froze to death, tear out their hair by the roots. But her favorite method was scalding. Darya would pour boiling water over victims slowly, cup by cup, making sessions last 3 to 5 hours. Some victims begged to be beaten to death instead because it would be faster. She would sit there for hours, watching them writhe, listening to them scream. One serf girl accidentally dropped something while cleaning. Darya beat her for 3 hours straight, then scalded her to death with boiling water, taking her time, making it last. Her preferred victims were young women, particularly those she considered pretty or who had recently gotten married. Historians believe this was sexually motivated jealousy. Can you imagine being a young serf woman on her estate? Living in constant terror, knowing that the smallest mistake, a missed spot while cleaning, looking up at the wrong moment, being too pretty, could result in hours of torture followed by death. For 7 years, Darya killed with impunity. Serfs who tried to complain were ignored or punished themselves. Local authorities looked the other way. She was nobility, after all. Local priests buried the bodies without questions. Police refused to investigate. She bribed officials with money and land. Other nobles knew but said nothing. Class solidarity protected her. But in 1762, 2 serfs managed to get a petition directly to the new Empress, Catherine the Great. Catherine, wanting to establish herself as an enlightened ruler, ordered an investigation. What they discovered shocked even hardened investigators in a brutal era. Bodies buried all over the estate. Witnesses who had seen the torture. Serfs with permanent injuries from Darya's discipline. The trial documented 138 confirmed murders, but many historians believe the true number was closer to 300. Darya was sentenced to death, but Catherine commuted it to life imprisonment. She was chained inside a basement dungeon in Moscow, in complete darkness with only a small window for air. For 33 years, she lived in that cell. Locals would come to spit on her through the window. Guards reported she went insane, talking to the walls, screaming at invisible enemies. She died in 1801, alone and mad. While Darya killed for pleasure, our next queen killed for paranoia and xenophobia, and her body count makes everyone else look merciful. Number 3, Queen Ranavalona I, the Mad Queen of Madagascar. Between 1828 and 1861, Madagascar was ruled by a queen so brutal that the population of her kingdom dropped by half. That's roughly 2 million people dead. Queen Ranavalona I didn't kill through war or plague. She killed through paranoia, xenophobia, forced labor, and a test so horrific it became known as the trial by poison. Ranavalona took power after her husband, King Radama I, died in 1828. She immediately reversed all his modernization efforts and began a reign of isolationist terror. First, she expelled all Europeans from Madagascar. Missionaries, traders, everyone, gone. Then she outlawed Christianity, making it a capital offense. But it was her justice system that truly revealed her madness. If you were accused of any crime, theft, Christianity, disloyalty, or simply being too successful, you faced the Tangena ordeal. You were forced to eat 3 pieces of chicken skin, then drink poison made from the nut of the Tangena tree. If you vomited up all 3 pieces of chicken skin, you were innocent. If you didn't, you died in agony. Here's the sick part. The amount of poison was controlled by the queen's executioners. If Ranavalona wanted you dead, they gave you a fatal dose. If she wanted you alive, they gave you just enough to make you vomit. It was a rigged system disguised as divine judgment. Between 1828 and 1861, an estimated 100,000 to 200,000 people died from the Tangent ordeal alone. Can you imagine living in a society where anyone could accuse you of anything and your trial was forced poisoning? Where your survival depended entirely on whether the queen wanted you dead that day. But Ranavalona's cruelty extended far beyond poison trials. She created a massive slave labor system, forcing thousands to work on vanity projects like her palace. In 1845, she organized a royal buffalo hunt. Sounds harmless, right? She required 50,000 men to participate as beaters and servants. Over 10,000 died from exhaustion, starvation, and accidents. 10,000 men died so the queen could be entertained for a few days. She ordered mass executions of Christian converts, often killing entire families. Some were thrown off cliffs. Others were boiled alive. Many were wrapped in reed mats and left in the forest for wild animals. One young Malagasy woman named Rasalama became the first Christian martyr in 1849. Given the choice to renounce her faith or die, she chose death. She was burned alive while praying. 17 others made the same choice that year. When a French-British force tried to invade Madagascar in 1845, Ranavalona responded by massacring anyone suspected of supporting Europeans. Thousands of her own people. Let's put this in perspective. In 1828, Madagascar had a population of approximately 5 million people. By 1861, when Ranavalona died, the population was 2.5 million. She killed half her kingdom. Some through violence, most through forced labor and starvation. She died in 1861 of natural causes, never facing justice for the deaths of millions. Her son immediately reversed all her policies and reopened Madagascar to the world. So far, we've covered over 2,001,700 deaths. But these next two queens took evil to a deeply personal level. Our next queen murdered her own son. Number 2. Irene of Athens, the Byzantine Backstabber. In 797 AD, the Byzantine Empire was ruled by a woman who did something almost unthinkable for a mother. She had her own son's eyes burned out with red-hot irons so she could take his throne. And that was just her final act. Irene of Athens was born around 752 AD and married the Byzantine Emperor Leo IV. When he died in 780, their son Constantine V was only 10 years old, so Irene ruled as regent. She should have stepped aside when Constantine turned 18. She didn't. For years, Irene manipulated, schemed, and politically maneuvered to keep power. She sided with different military factions, played court officials against each other, and systematically eliminated anyone loyal to her son. But Constantine was the legitimate emperor. He had the law on his side, the bloodline, the right. Eventually, the military forced Irene to hand over power in 790. Irene spent the next 7 years plotting her comeback. She spread rumors about Constantine's incompetence, bribed generals, turned the church against him, slowly poisoned public opinion. By 797, she had enough support. On August 15, 797, Irene's supporters ambushed Constantine in the Purple Chamber of the Imperial Palace. This wasn't random. It was the very room where he had been born, the symbolic birthplace of emperors. 5 men held him down while executioners approached with red-hot irons. Then they pressed the burning metal into his eye sockets. The screams echoed throughout the palace. Servants reported hearing them from hundreds of feet away. This wasn't just mutilation. In Byzantine culture, a blind person could not rule. By blinding her son, Irene made herself the sole legitimate ruler. Constantine died from his wounds shortly after. Whether the injuries were intentionally fatal or he died from infection, we'll never know. But the result was the same. Irene had murdered her own child for power. Can you imagine being Constantine? Knowing your mother orchestrated your capture, watched as they destroyed your eyes. Also, she could keep a throne she was supposed to give to you. But here's what makes Irene's story even more twisted. She never expressed remorse, never showed guilt. She genuinely believed she was saving the empire from a weak ruler. She saw blinding her son as mercy. After all, she didn't kill him outright. In her mind, she was the hero of the story. Irene ruled for 5 more years, becoming the first woman to rule the Byzantine Empire in her own right. She even tried to marry Charlemagne, king of the Franks, which would have united the Eastern and Western Roman empires. But Byzantine nobles revolted at the idea of a foreign king.
In 802, another coup overthrew her. She was exiled to the island of Lesbos, where she died a year later, reportedly living in poverty, forced to earn money by spinning wool. And here's the final insult to her victims. History remembers her as Saint Irene. The Orthodox Church canonized her for restoring icon worship. They conveniently overlooked the whole torturing and murdering her son thing. To this day, there are churches dedicated to Saint Irene of Athens across Greece. The woman who burned out her own child's eyes is worshipped as holy. But even Irene's matricide pales compared to our final queen, whose crimes were so extensive that her name became synonymous with terror itself.
Number 1. Queen Mary I of England. Bloody Mary. Picture this. Smithfield, London, 1555. A crowd gathers to watch a woman burn alive. Her crime? Refusing to renounce her Protestant faith. This wasn't an isolated incident. This happened hundreds of times during Mary I's 5-year reign. She didn't earn the nickname Bloody Mary by accident. Mary Tudor became Queen of England in 1553, after years of being declared illegitimate, sidelined, and humiliated by her father Henry VI and brother Edward VI, all because of religion. Her mother, Catherine of Aragon, was cast aside. Mary was declared a bastard. She watched her family destroyed by Protestantism. When she finally took power, Mary had one obsession: to forcibly return England to Catholicism, no matter the cost. The cost was measured in bodies. Mary reinstated heresy laws that had been repealed under her brother. Then she began burning Protestants at the stake. The method specifically chosen because it was the most painful way to die, meant to mirror the fires of hell. The burnings were public spectacles. Families forced to watch. The victim tied to a stake, wood piled around them, a bag of gunpowder sometimes mercifully tied around their neck to speed death. But not always. Sometimes the fires were slow. Sometimes they burned for over an hour before the victim finally died. Mary burned 280 people during her 5-year reign. That's roughly one person every 6.5 days. But the raw numbers don't capture the full horror. Mary burned pregnant women. She burned elderly bishops. She burned common people whose only crime was owning an English language Bible. One of the most famous victims was Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. He had been instrumental in her father's break from Rome. Mary forced him to watch his colleagues burn first. Then she offered him mercy if he recanted his Protestant beliefs. Desperate and terrified, Cranmer recanted. He signed the document renouncing everything he believed. Mary ordered him burned anyway. But Cranmer did something extraordinary at the stake. He thrust his right hand, the unworthy hand that had signed the recantation, into the flames first. He held it there, burning, saying, "This hand hath offended." He kept it in the fire until it burned completely away, then died in the flames. Can you imagine having that much courage while literally burning to death? But perhaps Mary's worst crime happened in 1556. A pregnant woman named Peratine Massey was sentenced to burn for heresy. As the flames rose around her, she gave birth in the fire. Bystanders pulled the baby from the flames, trying to save it. Guards on Mary's orders threw the newborn baby back into the fire. That single act turned even some Catholics against her. There's cruelty, and then there's burning an infant alive. Mary also executed potential threats to her throne. Lady Jane Grey, who had been queen for 9 days and wanted nothing to do with power, was beheaded at age 17. Beyond burnings, Mary hanged, drew and quartered traitors, beheaded nobles, imprisoned hundreds in the Tower of London. Some died from torture, not formal execution. But here's what makes Mary's story tragic and complex. She desperately wanted a child, a Catholic heir to secure her legacy. She announced pregnancy twice, showed physical symptoms: swelling, lactation. The court prepared for royal births. No baby ever came. Historians now believe she had ovarian tumors, the same condition that eventually killed her. This desperation for an heir, this biological failure, fueled some of her most violent episodes. Her husband, Philip II Spain, was 11 years younger and found her unattractive. He spent minimal time in England, had affairs, while Mary remained faithful and increasingly bitter. Can you imagine being rejected by your husband, betrayed by your body, and watching your religious mission fail as people continued converting to Protestantism despite your executions?
Mary's reign of terror ended when she died in 1558, possibly from the same tumors that had caused her phantom pregnancies. She left no heir. Her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth took the throne and reversed everything Mary had done. Today, Mary I is remembered almost exclusively for her religious persecution. Bloody Mary became synonymous with terror, persecution, and fanaticism. Some say if you stand before a mirror and say her name 3 times, she appears. That legend? It comes from the real fear she inspired. Children still play the Bloody Mary game in darkened bathrooms. That's how deeply her terror embedded itself in cultural memory.
6 queens, 6 different centuries, 6 different reasons for cruelty. Elizabeth Báthory killed for vanity, believing blood would keep her beautiful. Zetian killed for political survival in a world that didn't want her to rule. Darya Saltykova killed for entertainment, pure sadistic pleasure. Ranavalona killed from paranoia and xenophobia, destroying half her kingdom. Irene killed her own son for power, then was declared a saint, and Mary killed for God, believing she was saving souls by burning bodies. Let's put this in perspective. Between these 6 women, we're looking at over 2 million confirmed deaths. 2 million people who had names, families, dreams, lives. What do these 6 women teach us about power and evil? First, evil has no gender. The capacity for cruelty, for torture, for murder on a massive scale. It's not limited to men. When given absolute power and no accountability, both men and women can become monsters. Second, power without checks and balances inevitably leads to atrocity. Every queen on this list had unchecked authority. No one could stop them. No one could say no. And that absolute power revealed, or perhaps created, absolute evil. Third, history often overlooks female tyrants. We remember Nero, Hitler, Stalin. But how many people know about Darya Saltykova or Ranavalona? Perhaps because it challenges our assumptions about women. Or perhaps because we're more willing to forgive cruelty when it comes from a queen rather than a king. These 6 women ruled in different eras, on different continents, under different circumstances. But they all shared one thing. They proved that when it comes to evil, queens could be just as brutal, and often more creative, than any king. Can you imagine living under any of these rulers? Waking up every day, not knowing if you'd be accused of a crime and forced to drink poison, or dragged to a castle for torture, or burned at the stake for your beliefs, or targeted simply for being young and pretty. History remembers their victims far less than their crimes. The 650 women Elizabeth Báthory murdered. The 280 people Mary burned alive. The 2 million who died under Ranavalona. They all had names. They all had families. They all had lives that were cut short by women who wielded power without mercy. So the next time someone talks about history's evil rulers and only mentions men, remember these 6 queens. Remember that evil doesn't discriminate. And perhaps most disturbing of all, these are just 6. History is filled with others. Catherine de' Medici orchestrated the massacre of 30,000 Protestants in a single night. Empress Dowager Cixie's policies led to the deaths of 30 million Chinese. Queen Fredegund of Francia personally stabbed her stepchildren to death. The list goes on. If you found this deep dive into dark history fascinating, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment. Which queen shocked you most? And here's a question to think about. If these women had been men, would history remember them differently? Would their crimes be forgiven, forgotten, or amplified? Until next time, stay curious about history's darkest chapters. Because understanding the evil humans are capable of is the first step in making sure it never happens again. These queens ruled with blood and terror. Let's make sure no one ever rules that way again.